And subhanAllah, sometimes like the ayah that I happened to be reading, or the passages that I happened to be reading that day as I went through, it just applied to what I was going through. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say this, that they're going through something and then somehow maybe somebody shares an ayah with them, or their Qur'an app or their Muslim app sends them like a notification. However way, the ayah that they needed to hear somehow finds its way to them. So there was a time when I was in college and I was feeling a lot of anxiety about my future, and I was studying for my exams, and I was just very, very stressed overall, and I was feeling just very, very anxious. And I told myself, okay, I was trying to like practice having balance, so I was like, okay, let me do my Qur'an reading for today. So
Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to another episode of Mindful Meeting Podcast. I'm your host, King Abu. Alhamdulillah, Allah out of His infinite grace and mercy, He has blessed us with another Shahr Ramadan, another opportunity, another chance to worship Him sincerely, to obey Him, and inshallah, we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts our ibadat, our good deeds, and inshallah that become a source for us for forgiveness, for repentance, and inshallah for His acceptance. Today we have a special guest in the studio, not a new guest, but a special one. Inshallah we'll introduce in a little bit, but I do want to take this opportunity firstly to acknowledge my dear wife, who has blessed us with this beautiful decoration and getting ready for the vibes of Shahr Ramadan, inshallah. But before we get started, let's go ahead and make a small dua for our brothers and sisters in Palestine and for all of the Islamic Ummah. And to do that, our special guest, please make a dua for us.
okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم أصلح أحوال المسلمين في فلسطين وفي كل مكان. Oh Allah, please settle the affairs of our brothers and sisters in Palestine and all around the world. Ya Allah, please give them justice, and Ya Allah, please give them relief from their suffering. Ameen.
Allahumma ameen. Today we're gonna be talking about a very important topic that I think is relevant and related to this blessed month of Ramadan, and that is how to build a connection and a relationship with the noble Qur'an. And to do that, obviously, our sister Khadija, who's also a Qur'an teacher, will guide us along the way on how to build that connection, inshallah. But firstly, we have a riddle for you. Are you ready?
I guess so.
All right, you have no choice. I'm just kidding. All right, here's the riddle. Leave me and you'll never find the treasure. Follow me and you'll use me and you'll attain Allah's pleasure. What am I?
The Qur'an?
Wow, see? She knows what she's talking about. That's why we invited her. Yes, indeed, it is the Qur'an. Thank you so much. That was actually the fastest answer we've ever gotten in this podcast.
I had some hints already.
Alhamdulillah, that's good.
Based on the context.
Right, exactly. I try to make the riddles revolve around the topic, so alhamdulillah. So speaking of the Qur'an, there are many books around the world. Some very fascinating, brilliant books, entertaining books, all of the above, even religious scriptures and everything, right? What makes the Qur'an so special? What is so different about the glorious Qur'an?
That's a great question. So I was really thinking about what are the different things that makes the Qur'an special. The first thing that comes to mind is that it is actually the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So like in other religions, for example in Christianity, they have the Bible, but the Bible is not believed to be the actual words of God, but it was written by saints and scholars. But the Qur'an is actually the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we have directly with us. So, you know, the revelation through Angel Jibreel alayhi salam reached the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and now we have it here with us. So, and another thing is it's actually preserved from that time until now. So if you haven't heard of the Sana manuscript, look it up. It's actually like kind of like a copy, not a copy, but part of the Qur'an dating back to the 7th century. So, for context, the Prophet ﷺ passed away in 632 AD.
Okay.
These fragments that we have of the Qur'an date back to that same century. And when the researchers compared it with the current Qur'an that we have, they found like parts of Surah Al-Baqarah, parts of other surahs, and it's exactly the same.
Wow.
So it's miraculous, like how the Qur'an has been preserved over time, and it's like we believe this is the word of Allah. Allah says in the Qur'an that Allah Himself will preserve the Qur'an, and we have the proof that it has been preserved throughout all the way until today's time. So.
Yeah, it is really a miracle. Not even one letter has been altered. Subhanallah.
Right, subhanallah.
Yeah.
And there's also other miracles of the Qur'an too. So, like, ranging from linguistic miracles, mathematical miracles, scientific miracles, so many miracles that things that we didn't know 1,400 years ago that are alluded to in the Qur'an that scientists only recently have discovered. That also, like, I guess gives one more reassurance about the true nature of the Qur'an being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words. Yeah.
Would you be able to give us examples of such like scientific examples or mathematical miracles that was mentioned 14 centuries ago?
Yeah. So there's one that it's a mathematical miracle. It's kind of hard to explain because you really need like a whiteboard. You have to write everything out. But the Arabic letters, they also have numerical like equivalencies. And a number that's special is 19 because it's to do with like the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the letters, I believe those letters add up to 19.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like somehow the ayat kind of, when you add up the sums of them, they're multiples of 19 on those verses that talk about unity. That's just one example.
Wow.
It's hard to really explain, but I would definitely say to go and like search out. Inshallah, I'll try to find that exact video that I watched that explained this specific one. But there's so many. Like, for example, day and night, the amount of times they're mentioned is going to be equal. Or, for example, the amount of times that water is mentioned in the Qur'an and land is mentioned in the Qur'an, when you compare the ratio, it's the ratio of water to land of the earth.
Wow.
It's the same ratio. And that's also matches how many times water was mentioned in the Qur'an, how many times land was mentioned in the Qur'an.
Wow,
so there's so many. When it comes to scientific miracles, things to do with like the universe, the stars, like the system of that, or even mountains, like how they're like they're deep into the ground. So if you look at like a mountain, but you also look at how it looks underneath the earth, it's kind of like a peg, like it goes way deep down. And the Qur'an mentions that we made the mountains like pegs that go deep into the earth. So like there's just so many. There's just so many. But those are just a few that came to my mind right now.
SubhanAllah. And just when you think like you read a particular passage, right, and you thought you understood it, but then there's even deeper meaning in another layer, another SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
Wow. How would you describe your relationship with the Noble Qur'an? Are there like moments or events or examples in your life whereby maybe you were going through a rough patch or something like that, and you found solace or peace and comfort in the Noble Qur'an? Is there something like that happened in your life that you want to share?
Yeah. I think my relationship with the Qur'an really developed when I started reading it with the translation. So I was talking to my friend one day when I was in college, and we were just talking about the Qur'an, and I said to her, like, I struggle to read the Qur'an, like, consistently. Like, I don't really read the Qur'an every day. And she was like, why don't you just start with one ayah? Just read one ayah and read the translation. Just stick with that and do it every day, and you'll see your relationship with the Qur'an develop.
Wow.
And that is so true. That is so true. Because that's what I did. I tried to just every day read one ayah with the translation. Some days I had to really push myself to read that one ayah. And other days, I'd read one ayah, but I would want to keep going and read more and more. But I told myself, just at least read one ayah with the translation. And subhanAllah, sometimes, like, the ayah that I happened to be reading, or the passages that I happened to be reading that day, as I went through, it just applied to what I was going through. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say this, that they're going through something, and then somehow maybe somebody shares an ayah with them, or their Qur'an app or their Muslim app sends them like a notification. However way, the ayah that they needed to hear somehow finds its way to them.
Yes.
Yeah, so so there was a time when I was in college, and I was feeling a lot of anxiety about my future, and I was studying for my exams, and I was just very, very stressed overall, and I was feeling just very, very anxious, and I told myself, okay, I was trying to like practice having balance, so I was like, okay, let me do my Qur'an reading for today. So I started listening to Surah Taha. And somehow it was just exactly what I needed, subhanAllah. The surah talks about the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. First of all, the surah starts أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم طه ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى. It's addressing the Prophet ﷺ. Allah is addressing him directly as Taha. And we did not send the Qur'an on you that you feel anxiety or pressure or worry or any of those emotions. And so it's a very soothing surah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to describe the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. How many times Allah guided him, how He inspired Prophet Musa alayhi salam's mother to put him in the basket, and that how He took care of him. He grew up in Pharaoh's palace, and then he accidentally killed a person, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped him find a whole family, and then from there until Prophet Musa alayhi salam ends up exactly where he needs to be when he talks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the fire. So all of that was just like, whoa, like Allah is really looking after us and helping us to find our path, to be where we need to be. So yeah.
That gives me chills. I can definitely relate to that. Whether it's like you're attending a majlis, a lecture, or whatever, and the speaker says something, and it makes you think like, what? Is Allah talking to me through that speaker? Because there's something he or she says that just hits you, and the Qur'an is exactly the same way. I remember when when I was deciding to move to Houston, right? And I was very stressed and just trying to navigate through my own thoughts, and there were like a plethora of thoughts running and racing in my mind, and I was very exhausted emotionally and mentally. I was just depleted, and I said, Ya Allah, I'm done, I'm tired, I just give up, I put everything in your hands, I don't know what to do, you guide me. What do I do? Do we move to Houston? Do we stay here? Like, I don't know what to do anymore. And so I decided to go to the bathroom, make wudu, and get my musalla out, and I prayed 2 rak'ahs, and I said, Ya Allah, I'm here right now as your confused, weak servant. I don't know what to do. I need your guidance. And I finished my prayer, and I opened the Qur'an, and I said, Ya Allah, Bismillah, okay, guide me, talk to me, tell me what to do. And subhanAllah, I opened the Mus'haf, the Qur'an, and I opened Surah Al-Ankabut, and I started reading it. And with the little Arabic that I understand, I read the translations afterwards too, but just with the little Arabic that I understood or understand, I was reading the ayats, and Allah is telling me, like, through that surah, like, my land is vast, and you can worship me from any place. You don't have to confine yourself in any one particular area. Go, and I'll do this, and I'm like, subhanAllah, and I'm just tearful. And it was Yom Jum'ah too. I was like, ya Allah, just an overwhelming feeling of just solace and comfort and peace. Allah says, Allah bi dhikrillah tatma'innul qulub, and that تطمئن القلوب, wallahi, I could just feel it pouring down upon me, and that's when I realized, okay, this is Allah's decision. He wants me to make this one. So I can definitely relate to that, subhanAllah, that when you open the Qur'an, whatever passage it is, whatever you're going through at that moment, Allah talks to you, subhanAllah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Through those moments of where you build those habitual but consistent small habits of reading one verse or two verses every day consistently, was there a passage or a verse that became your favorite that you want to share?
I love Surah Maryam.
Yes, one of my favorite surahs, for sure.
I just love how the way the story is described is so beautiful. Not only does, the Quran has an innate rhythm and melodies within it, and I just love the way Surah Maryam sounds. But what makes it even more beautiful is the way Allah describes the story of Prophet Zakaria alayhi salam, and even the story of the birth of Prophet Isa alayhi salam. It's just so heartfelt. It's so heartfelt. The main messages that I get is the hope. Prophet Zakaria alayhi salam never stopped asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a child. Even though he was old and even though his wife was barren, like it says in the ayat, he never ever stopped asking. And subhanAllah, it just, the way he responds, so he's responded to that you will have a son. And Prophet Zakaria alayhi salam, even though he just made dua for this and his dua was just accepted, says, how can I have a son when I'm so old and my wife is barren?
I've always been curious about that question.
Yeah, I think it shows the humanness. I know you can do it, ya Allah, but my mind is just blown away. Whoa. Yeah. And the way Allah describes when Prophet Yahya alayhi salam is born, oh Yahya, grab the book with strength. So then Prophet Yahya alayhi salam is born, and then the story of Sayyidah Maryam alayhi salam. And one thing that she says, which is just striking, is when she's giving birth.
Yeah.
And she says, I wish I didn't even exist.
Right.
And when I first read that, I paused. I was like, wait, what? You can say that?
Yes.
She said this, and she's one of the best women, one of the best human beings to ever be created. And it just made me think Allah is so close and understanding. She had that relationship where Allah understands her. She understands Allah. She can express herself exactly how she feels. And then the comfort comes where she's told, shake the tree, there's water here for you flowing as well. And that comfort comes directly to her too. So I could go on, but it's just, I absolutely love. And even after that, when it talks about the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, the exchange that he has with his father figure, or it might be his uncle, his father, I don't know, but with that figure in his life, he has that exchange with him, and it's such a caring exchange, and it kind of breaks your heart. So yeah, it's just a very, very heartfelt surah.
No, for sure, you can literally feel the pain of Nabi Ibrahim trying to guide his father figure or uncle, whatever, right? And his stubbornness and unwilling to accept Allah. And you can just feel Nabi Ibrahim I'm trying to give you hidayah, come, I love you. But what you said about Sayyidah Maryam, salamullah alayha, oh my goodness, I've never even thought of it that way. Subhanallah. So I guess in a way you could look at it because if I'm looking at it me, I'm thinking wow, why is Sayyidah Maryam talking like this? Why is she wishing she was dead and this? But you're saying this is the raw version of Sayyidah Maryam, because she has that intimate relationship with Allah where He knows everything about her, and He's not looking at it why are you, being ungrateful or this and that, but He actually understands her pain and what she means. Every word she's saying, she's a ma'soomah, everything she's saying is calculated. Wow, I've never looked at it from that perspective.
Yeah, and it's very validating too.
Yeah.
When it just comes to the experience of childbirth, like we have this example in the Qur'an, and it's validating to women overall about what they go through when they're giving birth. One of the biggest pains that you can ever imagine. So
For sure, 100%. Um, the Quran, as we know, it doesn't get the respect it does in a lot of times. We don't read it as often as we should. We don't build that connection with it. Even when we have programs, sometimes we allocate like maybe a couple of minutes at the introduction of the program just to read it, like to serve as a placeholder or something like that. Um, I remember even one time in one of the centers I volunteered to read the Quran before the commencement of the program, and I was asked what surah I was reading. I was told, no, that's too long. People didn't come here to listen to the Quran. They want to listen to the lecture instead. So instead, just read this short surah. And I was like, wow. For a second, I hesitated. I'm like, I don't even want to do it anymore. Like this much level of disrespect we're giving to the Quran, I don't even want to participate anymore. But I said, do it anyway. You're still, doing it for fi sabilillah anyway. So do it. So I guess my question is, it doesn't seem like the Quran is used as a source of blessing to bless our programs and stuff like this. What is the cause of this and why are we behaving this way? Why are we treating the Quran as just like a placeholder?
yeah, I think it's to do with how we view the Quran overall. I think that culturally we've gotten used to the Quran just being a book that you read it when there's a funeral or like there's a certain occasion for it. You read it for like thawab and rewards and stuff like that, to bless something. But I think we stopped really turning to the Quran for guidance. I think we stopped really collectively trying to understand it, to reflect on it, and to really apply it in our lives. I think it's just like the way we look at it culturally. We encourage kids to like memorize the Quran, and we encourage children to read the Quran. I feel like as adults, we don't really do that sort of thing anymore. And on top of that, we don't focus on understanding the Quran. I think it's a whole mindset around it, on how, like, what role does the Quran play in our lives? What role does it really play in our lives as individuals, and then more so like as a community? We don't have enough programs geared towards the Quran in terms of understanding it, in terms of applying it, reflecting on it. I just don't see that we have enough of that sort of thing going on, and we don't really prioritize it.
So I think, and I was dying to ask you this question. It's a good segue actually, I think. Because I think when we have a relationship with something, we go out of our way to communicate, right? For instance, like let's say a couple is in their dating stage or getting to know each other stage, right? They're constantly texting each other, talking to each other and all this, getting to know each other to build that relationship, right? Because without those efforts of trying to communicate with that person, that relationship is not going to be solidified and built, right? I think that's what we're lacking. So my question is, how do we get to that point with the Noble Quran where we connect and build a personal, intimate, deep relationship with our guide? That's essentially what it is, right? It's our hidayah. So how do we build a relationship with the Quran?
I think first and foremost, you have to spend time with the Quran. I think you really have to give the Quran your time. Because Allah constantly encourages us to reflect on the Quran, and that requires sitting with it, giving it time. You have to make it an actual priority. You have to make it a goal in your life. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. And yeah, I remember my first Quran. She wasn't my first Quran teacher, but she's the main Quran teacher I remember growing up. She was a neighborhood auntie, and all the kids would go after school and we would learn from her. And she was an older lady, mashallah. And she was also learning herself as well. She would tell us I just learned this from my teacher the other day, and she would tell us. And she always used to say to me, Khadija, the Qur'an, you have to live it. You have to live the Qur'an. She would say this to me over and over, and I just didn't understand because here I was, I don't know Arabic, I'm just learning. I was memorizing at the time. So I'm just memorizing these words in Arabic that I don't understand. And I was thinking, like, how? What do you mean apply the Qur'an? Is that even what the Qur'an is for? Like, what does that even mean?
Wow.
And she would say this, and it was only when I, like, grew up. I mean, there were times when I tried to, like, read the translation when I was younger. I didn't get it because it was, like, old English, you know? I didn't really understand. But when I, like, grew up, and I think one person that was very influential was Brother Ramadhan Ali Khan.
Oh, yes.
He really talks about the meaning of the Qur'an in depth in terms of the Arabic. And that's when I started to understand, whoa, there is so much, there's a wealth in here, a wealth of guidance and information, and there's so much to apply in our lives. So yeah, I think, and he really talks about like why have we not emphasized understanding the Qur'an, you know, reflecting on the Qur'an in that way. Why don't we make it a priority? And so I think that's the shift that kind of needs to happen, where we engage with the Qur'an actually as a guide. Like, I guess relating to this blessed month, there's an ayah in the Qur'an, Surah Al-Baqarah, it's ayah 185, and part of in that ayah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان صدق الله العلي العظيم. Allah says in this ayah that شهر Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, is the month in which the Qur'an was revealed. هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. It's a guidance for mankind, all of humanity, and it has clear proofs, clear examples, clear signs of the criterion, the distinguishing between right and wrong. So the Qur'an has all of this in it. This is kind of the reason Allah's saying we revealed the Qur'an for this, for guidance and for distinguishing between, you know, truth and falsehood. So that's what we need to use it for, and this is the month of the Qur'an that we are entering. So I pray that, and I say this to remind myself too, because sometimes like when you are studying recitation or you're studying memorization, you might lose that aspect of reflection and understanding and spending time on that. I mean, I think that should always take priority.
I think what we've done so well as Muslims is to memorize the Qur'an and just to recite it, like you said, where we kind of neglected the reflection, contemplation, and pondering aspect of it. So inshallah, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that in this blessed month of Ramadan, Allah gives us the tawfiq to be among those who not only recite the Qur'an, but build their relationship with it through pondering and beyond God to implement those lessons in our daily lives, inshallah. MashaAllah, you have a beautiful voice, and the way you recite the Quran is angelic, MashaAllah. May Allah bless you for it and increase you in that blessings, inshallah. What I noticed in the Muslim world, at least in some parts of the Muslim world, is that women aren't typically allowed, or, okay, let me rephrase that. Is it allowed in the Muslim world, and maybe some parts only, that women do not recite in the way you just did, in this melodious way, like the Abdul Basits of the world and whatnot? Is that frowned upon in the Muslim world? Is that even allowed in the Muslim world?
Yeah, that's a very relevant question, and it really depends on where. So there are certain parts of the world where, mashallah, there are so many professional female Qur'an reciters. And they, you know, they're in international competitions, they're on TV, radios, like, you name it, mashallah, and it's amazing. And there's there's nothing, there's nothing at all. There's no issue. And there isn't even that question. Like, if you were to ask them, they would say, I've never even heard that a woman can't recite Quran publicly. Like, it's not even a thing. So in places like Indonesia, Malaysia, it's just a norm, you know? And even in Egypt, if you go back in time, Egypt was a hub, mashallah, for Quran.
Right.
And, Abdul Basit is from Egypt, a lot of famous Quran reciters. And, when radios first came out, the first people to recite Quran on the radio in Egypt, 5 of them were actually women reciters. And one of the sheikhs that was playing, so there was a lot of changes that happened in Egypt politically, and women were not allowed anymore. And this sheikh said that I will not rest until women's voices reciting Quran are back on the radio.
Wow.
Yeah. So
who's this sheikh?
I don't remember his name right now.
Okay.
I can, inshallah, get his name and then I'll tell you.
Okay.
But I heard this from Sheikh Maryam Amir, who talks about this topic a lot. And yeah, I mean, there's even famous like Quran competitions in Dubai. One of the ones, actually, a recitation that I absolutely love, that I always listen to, it was the woman who won 1 year. She won the Quran competition, but you can watch it on YouTube, like it's public.
Oh, sure.
And the judges are male judges. So across the Sunni world, often there isn't really a problem with it. I mean, some will say there is, some will say there isn't. But a lot of it has to do with culture. Like Islamically, there isn't any concrete, evidence that it's forbidden. But a lot of the times it's based on precaution. I think that a lot of the time when these kind of ideas or precautions are become a thing, I don't know how to say, when these types of precautions are made, it's not really considered how that will affect the woman. So when a little girl is so close with the Quran, she loves reciting, she loves memorizing, she loves connecting with the Quran, but then when she gets older, she's told, well, you can't really recite. Where are you going with this? So it's very it's very sad. It's very, very sad, actually. A lot of women I know who have had this experience where they were close with the Quran, but they lost that touch because they weren't able to express, they weren't able to share, they weren't able to really benefit others through their recitation anymore. And there was a school in I believe it was Senegal, and they had boys and girls learning Quran, and they would participate in this competition at the end of the year, and they had good participation from both. But then one year, the girls were not allowed to participate in the Quran competition anymore based on this reason, and the number of girls who continued learning Quran at that school just dropped so low. And these are the effects that these kind of rulings have, because you're taking away the space. You're taking away the space. Yeah.
That's a heartbreak. Surely there must be someone who is fighting for this cause for our sisters. Is there anyone in the Muslim world?
Actually there is. And so Sheikh Maryam Amir, she's very, very active, mashallah. She does so much, and she interviews a lot of women who are reciters of the Quran, and there's so much inspiration to be found there. And she actually came up with this app called the Qari'ah app. So it's a compilation of women reciters, so women can listen to other women reciting Quran, because that's kind of what has become missing in the West specifically, where we often hear these kind of cultural precautions being made, is that there's a lack of role models for young girls who want to recite the Quran. So this app kind of compiles a lot of women who are doing that, who are professional reciters, and yeah, they can listen to it on the app. There's also in the Shia space, Sayyid Jalal Masumi, and he has a show on Ahlul Bayt TV, and he invites both men and women to recite the Quran. So he has guest reciters that come, and he's also really advocating for this too. The Qur'an in of itself is a recitation.
Mm.
And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to recite the Qur'an in a measured way. And the Prophet, with tartil, in a measured way. So there's counts for each. You stretch here, you elongate this part is this length. There's different, tajweed rules that play into how you should recite the Qur'an. It's not just like any other book in English where you just start reading it,
Another reason why it's so special, right?
Absolutely,
Oh,
yeah. And so, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also tells us to recite the Qur'an in a beautiful way, with beauty. It is a recitation. We should recite it in a beautiful way, in a way that will capture the meaning and connect with the hearts of those who are listening. And so, it is a recitation.
Now that is very interesting that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family will actually say to recite the Quran in a beautiful way. My only question is, as I'm thinking or trying to imagine who he was talking to, or there are males and females that he was talking to?
The hadith says, I'm trying to recall the exact Arabic. It's very short. It's in Bihar al-Anwar.
Okay.
And it's an authentic narration. It's men. He uses the word men, which encapsulates both genders.
Sure, yeah.
لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يَتَغَنَّ بِالْقُرْآنِ. I think that's the exact. They are not among us who does not recite the Qur'an in a beautiful way. So it's emphasized, it's very emphasized that we should recite the Qur'an with, try to recite the Qur'an beautifully. You should try to recite the Qur'an beautifully with tartil, with tajweed, with the rules of its recitation.
So we're going to move on from that one, but I just have one quick question because of what you just said right now. What if somebody's playing that devil's advocate, right? What if they say, well, yes, we're not against men and women reciting the Quran in a beautiful way, but we have to let the women recite it in the privacy of their homes in a beautiful way, and the man can do whatever. How would you respond?
There's actually a narration. I unfortunately don't have the exact reference, but it was Sheikh Maryam Amir who mentioned this narration.
Okay.
That one day the Prophet ﷺ was walking with a companion past a woman's house, and he could hear her recite the Qur'an. And the Prophet ﷺ praised the woman about how her recitation was beautiful and moved his heart.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is very profound.
That is very profound because she is in Medina. The walls are, not that thick. Right. You could be heard outside your house. The Prophet ﷺ, if there was any issue with her being heard, would have said, she should lower her voice. She shouldn't be heard by others. Instead, the Prophet ﷺ praised her for her recitation.
Wow.
So
you can even take that as an encouragement that we all need to do, men or women. Wow. Anyway, so recently you participated in a competition, right? Quranic recitation competition or something like that.
Yeah, it was a hifz competition. They also had a portion for.
Gotcha. So you were doing the memorization part of it. Okay. So my question is, well, first, would you like to tell us about that event? What motivated you? Why did you go? What was the inspiration? And what lessons did you derive or learn from that you would like to share?
So there, so I was studying the Quran in terms of memorizing consistently, but I at one point I kind of fell off of that. And so when I came here, one of the teachers that I work with, she told me about this competition and she said, you should do it, sign up, start memorizing again, do it, go for it. And I was like, great. So I kind of used it as motivation to help me get back on track. Because we all know life gets really busy, we fall off. But I feel like having something set in stone where you're like, okay, this is coming up, it's on my calendar, it's that date, and I know I have to be ready for it.
Right.
It will make you put the work in,
exactly.
So it kind of helps with that. So that's kind of how I, joined the competition. And it was a really, really great experience. They have different levels, so, you could participate from memorizing 1 juz, 3 juz, 5, and so on, all the way to the whole Qur'an category. And it's held in Chicago every single year. It's a U.S. competition. And yeah, it's really, really inspiring to see people of all different ages and backgrounds coming for the Qur'an. And you get so inspired, mashallah. And it's just an atmosphere of, just inspiration. That's really the main word that I can use to describe it. And yeah, so.
What did you learn from it?
Well, one thing is that competitions do keep you going. So it really boosted me overall in terms of continuing to study the Qur'an. And inshallah, I do want to go back and go participate in the next level next year, inshallah, and so on. There was a kid who memorized the whole Qur'an, and he won in that category. And he said that he would participate in the competition, and the next year he would add on like 5 more juz, participate in the next category, and keep doing that every year until he memorized the entire Qur'an. So yeah, there's many great stories. And yeah, it's awesome to host things like this that encourage everyone to develop, work on their relationship with the Qur'an and prioritize the Qur'an.
Awesome. As we conclude, what are your final words of wisdom, especially as it relates to the Qur'an, specifically in this blessed month of the Ramadan?
I think my final words are, the Qur'an brings so much peace. It brings so much peace and serenity. There are days when I come back from work and I just want to sit and listen to the Qur'an or read the Qur'an and just soak it in. So it's the month of the Qur'an, it's Ramadan, it's already a blessed month. I would say take this opportunity right now, this Ramadan, to make one goal related to the Qur'an. Anything, whether it's listening to the Qur'an, reading the Qur'an, understanding the meaning, listening to tafsirs or reading tafsirs, whatever it is, make that one goal that you want to have to develop your relationship with the Qur'an. And stick with it this month, inshallah.
Awesome. Inshallah. I'll try to implement that myself. I really love that goal, because the really only way we can make, as you said, I really love to leave the Quran, the advice that your teacher gave you. The only way I believe to leave the Quran is to implement its principles in our daily lives. And inshallah, we'll be able to do that in this blessed month of Ramadan. That concludes our episode for today, but I think you're pretty familiar on how we conclude the show. So, what is your message to humanity?
Okay, that actually caught me on the spot this time. I would say forgive.
Oh, forgive. Yeah. Forgive yourself or others?
Both.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, forgive. All right, guys, so that concludes this episode about the blessed month of Ramadan. And on behalf of the entire Mindful Meeting podcast and myself, we want to wish all of you and our guests Ramadan Mubarak, Ramadan Kareem. Join us next time as we bring in a very, very special guest to the show, and we discuss the root causes of divorce and how to prevent it, and as we also celebrate the wiladat of our blessed and beloved Imam Al-Hassan Al-Mujtaba alayhi salatu wasalam. Until then, this is your host King Abu saying so long, and remember to treat each other with kindness. Salam.